The Vietnam War has been dragging on for years, thousands of young American soldiers are dying overseas, and your government keeps telling you, victory is just around the corner. You trust them, they are the leaders of the United States after all. But then, a bombshell drops. Top-secret government documents prove that nearly every president, from Truman to Johnson, has lied to you, to Congress, and to the world, about why we are in Vietnam, how the war is going, and whether it can even be won. This is not a spy thriller. This is the real story of the Pentagon Papers leak, one of the most consequential events in modern American history. To understand the Pentagon Papers, we have to go back to 1967. Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, a key architect of the Vietnam War, was growing deeply disillusioned. He privately doubted the war could be won, even as he defended it publicly. McNamara ordered a top-secret, comprehensive study of every U.S. decision involving Vietnam from 1945 to 1967. A team of 36 experts spent 18 months piecing together 7,000 pages of classified memos, cables, and reports. The final product was 47 volumes, officially titled United States-Vietnam Relations, 1945-1967. It was locked away in the Pentagon marked Top Secret, and meant only for the eyes of the highest government officials. No one outside a tiny circle knew it existed, until Daniel Ellsberg. Ellsberg was not a radical protester or a foreign spy. He was a Harvard-educated, former Marine Corps officer, a respected defense analyst who had worked directly on the Vietnam study. He had once been a hawk, believing deeply in the U.S. mission in Vietnam, but after serving in Vietnam and seeing the carnage firsthand, he had a moral awakening. He read the full Pentagon Papers and was horrified. The documents proved that 4 consecutive presidential administrations had systematically deceived the American public. Presidents Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson had all hidden critical truths they knew. The South Vietnamese government was corrupt and unstable. They knew bombing North Vietnam would not break the enemy's will, and they knew the war could not be won, with the strategies being used. Even worse, they continued sending young men to fight and die, while lying about progress to keep public support intact. Ellsberg made a life-altering choice. He believed the American people deserved the truth, even if it meant destroying his career and facing prison. For months, he snuck thousands of top-secret pages out of the Pentagon, copying them late at night on office copiers. He first tried to get Congress to hold hearings and release the information, but lawmakers refused to challenge the White House. With no other options, he turned to the press. In 1971, he gave copies of the Pentagon Papers to reporter Neil Sheehan at the New York Times. On June 13, 1971, the New York Times published the first explosive excerpt. The headline screamed that the U.S. government had secretly expanded the war into Cambodia, and Laos, lied about troop levels, and covered up evidence that the war was unwinnable. The country erupted. Americans, who had trusted their leaders for years, felt betrayed. Parents who had lost sons in Vietnam demanded answers. Protesters took to the streets in numbers not seen since the height of the anti-war movement. The Nixon administration panicked. President Richard Nixon and his team called the leak a threat to national security, claiming publishing the papers would endanger American troops and damage diplomatic relations. Just 3 days after the first story ran, the U.S. Department of Justice sued the New York Times, asking a federal court to issue a prior restraint, a court order forcing the paper to stop publishing. This was almost unheard of in American history. The First Amendment was supposed to protect the press from government censorship. A judge granted the temporary injunction, and the Times was forced to stop. But the story did not die. Ellsberg had also sent copies to the Washington Post. When the Post began publishing, the government sued them too. 2 of America's most powerful newspapers were now fighting the federal government for the right to tell the truth. The legal battle raced to the U.S. Supreme Court. On June 30, 1971, the court issued a landmark 6-3 decision in New York Times Company v. United States. The majority ruled that the government had failed to prove that publishing the Pentagon Papers would cause direct, immediate, and irreparable harm to national security. The injunction was lifted, and both newspapers resumed publishing without restriction. This decision reaffirmed the First Amendment's protection of press freedom and set a critical precedent. The government cannot censor the press just because it finds information embarrassing or politically damaging. While the press celebrated Ellsberg was in hiding, he surrendered to authorities days later and was charged with espionage, theft, and conspiracy. He faced up to 115 years in prison. But the story took another dramatic twist. Investigators later discovered that Nixon's White House had formed a secret group called the Plumbers to stop leaks. They broke into Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office to steal embarrassing information to discredit him illegal activities that would later become part of the Watergate scandal. In 1973, a judge dismissed all charges against Ellsberg, citing gross government misconduct and evidence tampering. So, what exactly did the Pentagon Papers reveal? Let's break down the most shocking truths. First, they prove that the U.S. government had been involved in Vietnam long before the official troop buildup in the 1960s. As early as the 1940s, presidents secretly aided French colonial forces against the Viet Minh. Second, they showed that the Kennedy administration supported the 1963 coup that overthrew South Vietnamese President Ngo Dinh Diem, a fact officials had repeatedly denied. Third, they exposed that President Johnson secretly expanded the war into Cambodia and Laos, even while promising voters he would not widen the conflict. Most importantly, the papers proved that top officials knew the war was a stalemate and that victory was nearly impossible. Yet, they continued to escalate the fighting and lie about it to the public. The impact of the Pentagon Papers leak was immediate and long-lasting. Public trust in the federal government collapsed. Polls showed that a huge majority of Americans no longer believed what the president or military leaders said about the war. The leak strengthened the anti-war movement and pushed Congress to pass laws limiting the president's power to wage war without congressional approval. It also directly led to the Watergate scandal, as Nixon's obsession with stopping leaks fueled illegal acts that eventually forced him to resign. For journalism, the case became a symbol of press freedom, reminding the world that a free press exists to hold power accountable, even when it is dangerous and unpopular. Today, the Pentagon Papers are fully declassified and available to the public. They remain a powerful lesson about transparency, accountability, and the cost of government secrecy. Daniel Ellsberg, once called a traitor by his critics, is now widely regarded as a patriot who risked everything to tell the truth. The Vietnam War ended in 1975, but the legacy of the Pentagon Papers lives on. It teaches us that in a democracy, the people have a right to know when their leaders lie, especially when those lies lead to war, death, and suffering. This story is not just about a document leak. It is about the soul of America. It is about whether we allow our government to operate in darkness or demand honesty and openness. The Pentagon Papers did not just change how we view the Vietnam War. They changed how we view our government, our press, and our responsibility as citizens to question authority. It is a chapter of American history that we cannot afford to forget, because the fight for truth and transparency is as important today as it was in 1971. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel.